My mom had my uncle's secret baby. 10 years later, I took a DNA test that destroyed her lies and exposed the truth she hid from everyone. For 10 years, my mom told everyone my cousin was just my uncle's kid from a past relationship. No one questioned it. But something about the story never made sense to me. So one night I ordered a simple DNA test out of curiosity. When the results came back, they exposed a secret my mom had been hiding for a decade. That baby wasn't just my cousin, it was my mom's child too. I'm that child. The secret one. I found out the way a lot of people find out things they were never supposed to know. By accident. By a $99 birthday gift from my girlfriend. By a Tuesday morning in October when I opened my laptop while my coffee was still hot and everything I thought was true rearranged itself into something I couldn't put back. My name is Dion. I'm 28. And 10 years ago I stood in a hallway and heard something I didn't understand. Filed it away as a misunderstanding. Spent a decade convincing myself the ground was solid. The test told me the ground was never there. Start with the hallway. Because that's where this really begins. I was 17. Summer. Parents were having a cookout. I was inside grabbing ice from the garage. The door between the kitchen and garage was half closed. I heard my mom Carol's voice first. Low. Tight. The voice she uses when she's trying to keep something contained. She said, "You can't keep doing this." The other voice was my uncle Stephen. My dad's younger brother. He said, "I just want to know him." I stopped moving. Ice tray in both hands. My mom said, "You made an agreement." Stephen said, "I know what I agreed to. I'm asking you to reconsider." My mom said, "Not here, not today, not ever." Then silence. The back door opened. Someone stepped outside. I stood there for 30 seconds. Then I walked to the kitchen, put the ice down, went upstairs to my room. Told myself they were talking about a cousin. Some family argument I didn't know about. Told myself it was about anything other than the thing it was obviously about. I told myself that for 10 years. Let me tell you about Henry Coleman. My dad. The man who raised me. He's 62. Spent 35 years in construction, last 15 as a site supervisor. Up at 5 a.m. every day regardless. The kind of man who fixes things before they break and never mentions he fixed them. Coached my little league team from when I was 8 to 12. Never missed a game. I played badly my first 2 seasons. He never said anything except keep your eye on the ball. Taught me to drive in a grocery store parking lot that was closed Sundays. Patient. Methodical. Never made me feel stupid. He doesn't yell. Doesn't punish loudly. Just shows up and does what needs doing. Called me every Sunday for as long as I can remember. Still does. Still ends every call the same way. Be careful driving. He raised me for 28 years thinking I was his son. He was right about the part that matters. He was wrong about the biology. And somebody in that house knew that for all 28 years and never told him. Now Stephen. He's 56. Younger than Henry by 4 years. The easier brother, people always said. More charming. Landscaping business that did well. Never had kids of his own. He and his wife Paula got married when I was 6. I was in the wedding. Wore a little bow tie. There's a photo somewhere. He showed up for all the major things. Thanksgiving. Christmas. Birthdays. Good at remembering details. Asked about my school projects. Asked about friends by name. Came to my high school graduation and my college graduation both. Shook my hand. Told me he was proud of me. I thought that was just him being a good uncle. I didn't know he was watching his son graduate. Maya got me the AncestryDNA kit for my birthday in September. Said it'd be interesting to see the ancestry breakdown. I put it in the bathroom drawer and forgot about it for 3 weeks. Opened it on a Tuesday in October. Did the spit tube. Mailed it. Forgot about it again. Results came 6 weeks later. Email at 7:14 a.m. Maya still asleep. I was at the kitchen table, first cup of coffee, laptop open. Clicked through expecting percentages. West African. European. Maybe something surprising. Instead the first thing that loaded was DNA matches. Henry Coleman. Predicted relationship, extended family. Shared DNA, 14%. I read that twice. 14%. That's a number for half uncles. Cousins twice removed. People on the outer edge of your tree. Not a father. That number is not a father. I scrolled down. Stephen Coleman. Predicted relationship, close family, parent/child. Shared DNA, 49.8%. I put the coffee cup down. Sat there for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 minutes because I looked at the clock when I sat down and looked again when I finally moved. 6 minutes staring at 2 names and 2 numbers that could not both be true and were both right there on the screen. Henry, 14%. Stephen, 49.8%. Then the hallway came back. 10 years old in my memory. Half closed door. Tight voice. You can't keep doing this. I just want to know him. I knew what they were talking about. I always knew. I didn't call anyone that day. Sat with it for 24 hours. Printed the results. Read them 4 more times. Looked up what each percentage actually means. Read 3 articles about testing accuracy. Tried to find a scientific reason why a father would show 14% and an uncle 49.8%. There isn't one. Called my mom the next morning. Said I needed to stop by. She said come for lunch. I said no, I'll be there at 10. She said okay, your dad's working. I said I know. Drove to my parents' house with the printed results in my jacket pocket. House I grew up in. Driveway I learned to ride a bike in. She was at the table when I came in. Cup of tea. Sudoku book. Looked up and smiled and said you want breakfast. I sat across from her. Put the folded paper on the table between us. She looked at it. Looked at me. Didn't touch it. I said, open it. She said, where did this come from? I said, Maya got me a DNA kit for my birthday. Open it. She didn't move for 5 seconds. Then she unfolded it. Read it. Her face did something I've never seen it do before. Not guilt exactly. More like something she'd been holding for a very long time finally became too heavy to carry the same way. She set it down. Said, these tests aren't always accurate. I said, which part isn't accurate? She said, Dion. I said, the part where Stephen shows up as my biological father. Or the part where the man I've been calling dad for 28 years shows up at 14%. Which part is the inaccuracy? She went quiet. I said, how long? She tried to buy time first. Said margin of error. Said percentages don't always translate. Said she needed a minute. I gave her the minute. Watched the microwave clock count it. Then I said, how long have you known? She said, since before you were born. She and Henry had been married 4 years when it happened. Henry was working extra shifts, saving for a bigger house, rarely home. Stephen had lost his job and was staying with them for 2.5 months. She said it wasn't planned. I didn't ask if that was supposed to make it better. She said it lasted 6 weeks. I asked how many times. She said she didn't remember. I said approximated. She looked at the table. Said maybe 15 times. Maybe more. I stood up and walked to the window. Looked at the backyard where we had cookouts. Where I played. Where 10 years ago I stood in the garage holding a bag of ice and heard my mother tell my biological father you made an agreement. I said, when did Stephen find out? She said she told him when I was 2. Private test. He wanted to be involved. She said no. The arrangement was he could be in our lives as my uncle so long as he never told me and never told Henry. I turned around. I said, so every birthday. Every holiday. Every time that man sat across from me at that table. He knew. She nodded. I said, he shook my hand at my college graduation. Henry shook my hand. Both of them in the same photo. One knowing. You knowing. Me the only person in that picture who had no idea what I was standing in the middle of. She started crying. I picked up the results. Put them in my pocket. Said I need to go. She said Dion please. I said I'll call you. I didn't say when. I sat in my parents' driveway for 40 minutes without starting the car. Just looked at the house through the windshield. Thought about Henry. 5 a.m. every morning. Every little league game. The grocery store parking lot on Sundays. Be careful driving at the end of every call for 28 years. Thought about Stephen. The bow tie at his wedding. Asking about my friends by name. Both graduations. Proud of you. Said he was proud of me. And every single time he said it he knew he was saying it to his son. I called Maya. She answered second ring. I said something happened with my family, I need a few days. She said okay. She asked if I was safe. I said yes. She said call me when you're ready. Drove home. Didn't eat. Went to bed at 8 p.m. Lay there until 2 a.m. Morning came. I called Stephen. He picked up on the first ring. Like he'd been waiting. I said, we need to talk. 3 seconds of silence. He said, I know what this is about. I said, then you know where to meet me. We met at a diner 20 minutes from his house. He got there before me. Already had coffee. Looked like he hadn't slept. Which meant Carol called him the minute I left her house. He started to say something when I sat down. I held up one hand. Said, I'm going to ask you questions. Answer them. He nodded. I said, tell me everything. His version matched hers on the facts. Differed only in emphasis. Talked about how alone she seemed. How Henry was never home. Talked about it the way people talk about affairs when they want you to understand context. I let him finish. Then I said, I heard you. In the garage. 10 years ago. Door was half open. You said I just want to know him. My mom said you made an agreement. He looked at the table. I said, I spent 10 years telling myself I misunderstood. Made up a whole alternative explanation. Kept it alive for a decade because the real one was too much to look at straight. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "You watched me call Henry my dad for 28 years. We're at my little league games. Both my graduations. Shook my hand. Told me you were proud of me." He said yes. I said, and said nothing. He said, "Your mother made me promise. I asked her to tell you more than once. She always said no. I told myself you were better off not knowing. That Henry was a good father." I said, "That was your justification for lying to me for 28 years. That I was better off not knowing who I actually am." Nothing to say to that. I said, "I'm not interested in whose promise it was. You made a decision. Both of you. Every single year you made it again. That's not a mistake. That's a policy." Left $12 on the table for the coffee I didn't drink. Walked out. Telling Henry was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought about not telling him. He's 62. My father in every way that has ever mattered. Thought about carrying it alone and protecting him. Seriously considered it for 2 days. Then I thought about him going to his grave not knowing. Living the rest of his life inside a story someone else quietly edited. I thought about what he deserved. He'd spent 28 years earning the truth. Drove to his job site on a Thursday afternoon. He was at the trailer with blueprints. Saw me coming and straightened up. Said, "Everything okay?" I said, "I need 5 minutes. Can we walk?" We went to the far edge of the lot, away from the crew. I handed him the printed results. Said, "Read this." He read it. Face didn't move. Read it again. Looked up. He said, "Is this real?" I said yes. He looked at the paper one more time. Then he folded it carefully. Handed it back to me. Put his hard hat on. Said, "Give me tonight. I'll call you." Walked back to the blueprints. I stood there a moment. Then I walked to my car. Drove home. Waited. He called at 9 p.m. We talked for 2 hours. I'm not giving you everything because some of it belongs only to us. But here's what mattered. He said he found out about the affair 15 years ago. Not about me. Just the affair. He found something. Confronted Carol. She admitted it, said it was brief and meant nothing, completely over. He stayed. He said, "I loved your mother and I believed her. Or I chose to believe her. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." He hadn't known a child came from it. He said, "You're my son. You know that?" I said, "I know." He said, "I raised you. I was there for everything. Biology doesn't change that." I said, "I know that too." Long silence. He said, "I need time to process what I'm feeling about the rest of it. That's not about you. You understand that?" I said, "Take whatever you need." He said, "Be careful driving." And he hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time after that. Thinking about what it takes to be that kind of man. To receive news that would destroy most people and still end the call the same way he always has. Be careful driving. Like the most important thing, even now, is making sure I get home safe. Stephen told Paula that night. He called her before I could. Carol had called him right after I left the diner and he went home and told Paula everything first. I know how that conversation went because Paula called me 3 weeks later. We talked for an hour. She said she asked Stephen one question. She asked, "How long have you known this child was yours?" He said, "Since Dion was 2 years old." She said that's when she stopped talking to him. Not because of the affair, that was ancient history by the time she entered the picture. Because for 6 years of their marriage Stephen sat across from me at every holiday table knowing what he knew and saying nothing. She said, "I didn't marry a man who lies to children about who they are." She moved to her sister's 3 weeks later. They're separated now. I didn't cause that. Stephen's choices caused it. Going back 28 years and forward through every year he stayed quiet. Jade found out from Carol. My sister. 4 years younger than me. Carol called her before I had the chance to. Trying to control the narrative. Get to Jade first with her version. Jade called me an hour later. Furious. Not at me. At the situation. At the years. At the fact that she'd had a real relationship with Stephen her entire life, looked up to him, called him on his birthday, without knowing what he actually was to her family. She said, "He's been sitting at our table for my entire life knowing he had a child with Mom." While Dad passed the food and asked about his week. I said yes. She said, "How does someone do that?" I said, "You decide every year to do it again. That's how." She stopped going to Carol's house after that. Stopped answering Carol's calls for a month. They talk now, minimally. The warmth has a ceiling. I don't think it comes back. You can't unknow something like this. Henry told his mother. Beverly Coleman. 72 years old. Still sharp. Not a woman who has ever been confused about anything for very long. He called her because he said she deserved to know. Even at 72. She told me later that when Henry told her, She went quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, I always wondered. Something about the way Carol looked at Stephen. I told myself I was imagining things. She cut contact with Carol immediately. No call. No letter. Just stopped. When Carol texted, Beverly didn't reply. At 72 she decided she was done and was done. Stephen she didn't cut. He's still her son. But their phone calls are different now. Shorter. More careful. The easy warmth between them, the one I always saw at family gatherings, isn't there the same way anymore. A mother can love her child and still see him clearly. Beverly sees Stephen clearly now. Carol tried to reach me every day for 3 weeks. Calls first. Voicemails explaining. Giving context. Her feelings at the time. How young she was. How scared. How much she loved Henry and didn't want to destroy the family. I listened to two. Both variations of the same thing. On day 22 she showed up at my apartment. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there with her hands clasped in front of her. I opened the door. She said, Dion, I need you to understand why I made the choices I made. I said, I understand perfectly. She said, I was young and frightened and I thought. I said, you were 29 years old. You kept lying until I was 28. That's not a decision you made when you were young and frightened. That's a decision you remade every single day for 28 years. Every birthday. Every Thanksgiving. Every graduation. Every Sunday when Henry called me and said be careful driving and you were in the same house knowing what you knew. That's not one mistake. That's thousands of them. One per day for 28 years. She said, I was protecting our family. I said, you were protecting yourself. There's a difference. Protecting the family would have been not doing it in the first place. Everything after that was protecting the story you needed to tell about yourself. She started crying. I said, I'll call you when I'm ready. I closed the door. Henry and Stephen haven't spoken since. Henry told me this on a Sunday call. Said he'd thought about reaching out. Thought about what he would say. And kept arriving at the same place. There was nothing to say that would put back what was taken. Not rage. Henry doesn't live in rage. Something quieter. More total. Like a door that had been open his whole life was now just a wall. They grew up together. 2 brothers in the same house for 18 years. Close through adulthood. Showed up for each other the way brothers do. Now strangers because Stephen spent 28 years sitting at Henry's table knowing what he knew. Nobody talks about that part. Not the confrontations. Not the legal drama. Just 2 brothers who loved each other their whole lives. Now silence. Henry doesn't call him anymore. Doesn't go anywhere Stephen might be. Just done. Not explosively. Done. That silence is the thing I find hardest to sit with. I didn't cause it. But it exists because of me. Because of a decision made before I was born. Me and Stephen. We've met 3 times since the diner. First time, 2 months after. Dinner at a place neither of us had been. Neutral ground. He talked about himself. His work. His life. I listened. Asked some questions. Not warmly. But I asked. Second time. Coffee. He talked about wanting to figure out what we were to each other. I said I didn't know what that looked like. He said he understood. We sat with the uncertainty together. Most honest thing we've done. Third time, last month. He brought a photo album. His family, Henry included, when they were young. People I'd seen in photos at Henry's house my entire life, now carrying different weight. I looked through it. Didn't say much. But I looked. I don't know what he is to me. That's the truest thing I can say. He's not my father. Henry is my father. But Stephen is something. He's the reason I exist. He has my nose and the way I laugh and a stubbornness Carol always said came from her side. He has answers to questions I haven't finished forming yet. Whatever we become, if we become anything, it'll be built on what's actually true. Not on what 2 people decided I was allowed to know. The truth this time. All of it. Maya. I told her everything 2 weeks after the results. We sat on the floor of our living room with a laptop between us and I walked her through all of it. The test, Carol, the diner, Henry's phone call. Everything. She listened for 2 hours without interrupting once. At the end she asked me one question. She said, who do you want to be on the other side of this? I didn't have an answer. I told her that. She said, that's okay. You have time to figure it out. I'm here while you do. No advice. No opinions. Just, I'm here. That's what it looks like when someone is in your corner correctly. This whole thing taught me to recognize that. To understand what it feels like to be with someone who doesn't need anything from you except honesty. Where things stand. Henry and I talk every Sunday. Same as always. He went to therapy. Told me himself. Said it was helping. Said he recommends it. Henry Coleman, 62 years old, construction supervisor, going to therapy and recommending it to his son. That's who he is regardless of what Carol did or what Stephen kept quiet. Carol and I talk occasionally. Twice a month. Short calls. I answer because she's still my mother and a permanent silence doesn't serve either of us. But the relationship has a ceiling now it didn't have before. You can love someone and see them clearly. It's just different from the kind of love that doesn't know the whole story. Jade is rebuilding her version of things with Carol on her own terms. She's more direct about it than I am. States conditions clearly. I respect that. Paula and Stephen are still separated. I don't ask about it. That's theirs. Beverly still calls on my birthday. Called this year and said, "You're still my grandson." Nothing changes that. Then she said, "You have your grandfather's eyes." Said it simply, like she'd always known it and just been waiting for permission to say it out loud. Maybe she had been. The thing nobody tells you about finding out something like this is that the hardest part isn't the confrontations. Not the kitchen table with Carol. Not the diner with Stephen and $12 on the table. Not the job site with Henry watching him walk back to his blueprints. Those are hard but they end. You have them and you move forward. The hardest part is the reframing. Going back through 28 years and seeing everything differently. Every Thanksgiving. Every graduation photo. Every time Stephen asked about my life by name like someone who knew me well. Every Sunday call that ended "Be careful driving" while Carol sat in the same house knowing. Every ordinary moment that was happening inside a lie so carefully maintained I couldn't have found the edges of it from the inside. I lived inside a story someone else wrote for me. Written to protect themselves. They called it protecting the family. Called it complicated, human, a mistake from long ago. What it was, a decision to let me live my entire life without the truth of who I am. Made once and remade every single day after that. Every year. Every holiday. Every "I'm proud of you" while two people in the room held a secret that was mine to know. That's not one mistake. That's a structure. Built carefully and maintained for 28 years. And they kept me out of every conversation about it because the conversation was inconvenient for them. I don't regret taking the test. I want to be clear about that. People ask if I wish I didn't know. If some things are better left alone. If the not knowing was a kind of peace I should have kept. No. Not even close. The truth about who I am belongs to me. It was always mine. The decision to keep it from me was never theirs to make. They made it anyway. For 28 years. And the only reason it came out is because I spent $99 on a kit my girlfriend bought as a birthday present because she thought ancestry data was interesting. Henry is my father. That's real. That doesn't change. But Stephen is also something. And knowing what I'm actually made of, where I actually come from, what my actual story is, that's mine. It was taken from me before I was old enough to ask for it. I want it back. I'm working on figuring out what to do with it. A $99 test. 6 weeks of waiting. One result on a Tuesday morning that said, "The story you've been living, somebody else wrote it." The cast was real. Henry is real. Jade is real. The little league games and the Sunday calls and "Be careful driving" at the end of every conversation, all of it real. But somebody wrote themselves out of the story before I could read it. Sat across from me at every table for 28 years and smiled and passed the food and watched me live a version of my life with a piece missing. I have the piece now. It cost $99 and a Tuesday morning in every hard conversation since. Worth it. The story I'm living now is the whole one. And it's mine.